And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it. Genesis 1:28. We've established in the other lessons, in the other videos, the need to budget, the need to save. We've talked about the kinds of things that you save. But let me tell you about one reason you need to save that many people don't think about. You need to save for investment. Yes, you heard me right. You need to save so that you can have an asset with which to liquidate in the times of trouble, as we learned in our previous study with Joseph and his brothers. But remember, for you to have an asset to sell means that you need to own one. For you to own one means that you have to have bought one or been given one or invested in one. So imagine, just like we saw in the times of Joseph, there is all kinds of bargains going on. And so it's a time of famine, it's a time of scarcity. People are selling for different reasons. Selling because, they've run out of profit, they've run out of food, and so, they need to sell their asset for food. In your house, you have food, remember, like we prophesied. But there's a great deal. Imagine seeing a house worth £1 million on sale for £500,000. You know it's a good deal. You know it's a good property. You know it can yield a harvest. This person is selling because they're desperate. And here you are knowing that this is a good deal, but you don't have the money to buy it. You might not just have £500,000 sitting in your bank account, but if you had been saving, if you had been investing over time, maybe you could have the means to buy such an awesome deal in a time of scarcity or in a time of famine, or just in a time when somebody else is experiencing a time of famine, somebody else is experiencing a time of scarcity and emergency, and so they're trying to liquidate. I want you to think about saving, not just because a rainy day is coming, not just because you might need to feed yourself and your family, but actually think of saving as a way in which to get wealth. The top 10%, the top 5%, the top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world, this is what they do. In times of scarcity, when everybody is selling their shares from the stock market, selling their land, selling their property, selling their assets, panicking because they don't have enough, the wealthy who actually have enough are also using this time as an opportunity to take advantage of other people's times of scarcity to enrich themselves and to have investments for the long run for themselves. I want you to understand that savings is great, but multiplication is better. Multiplication itself is God's idea. The God we serve, the Genesis 1:28 God, he blessed them and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply. He didn't say, be fruitful and add on to yourselves. No, multiplication is God's idea. Let me give you an example. You have £20 or $20 or 20 naira or whatever it is, whatever your currency is, 20 Canadian dollars, 20 yen, and you're saving that monthly. That's how much you can afford to save. If you save £20 every month for 5 months, at the end of 5 months, you would have £100, right? Now, let me introduce you to this concept. Imagine taking that £20 and investing that £20 in a form of investment that will give you a 10% return, for example. 10% is easy to calculate. So you take your £20, rather than put it in your savings account, you put it in an investment, and that investment at the end of month one gives you 10% of your £20. At the end of month one, you have £22. 10% of £20 is £2. So you have £20. And so you take that £22, you have £20 plus the 2% investment, you take that £22 and you put that again into the investment. So now you've got your £20, you've got your £2 interest that you've made in month one, and you've got another £20 which you were going to save anyway. And so now you've got £42, and that £42 is again put into the investment for another 10%. If you keep on doing that over 5 months, in the place of addition and saving, you would have had £100. But in the place of multiplication, where you've got the 10% increase, which is what investing does, which is what multiplication does, you actually end up with £134. You can do the maths if you would like to do it on your own. 42 times 10% is 46.2. Add another £20, so on and so forth, you get £72. Go on again, add another £20, you get £102. Add another £2, another 10% interest, you get £134 at the end. And maybe we'll leave the numbers in the chat somewhere or something. But basically, what am I trying to show you is that the blessing that God wants you to have is beyond the addition. It's beyond you saving and having £100. It's actually the multiplication that God talked about in Genesis 1:28. This example that I've just given you is actually referred to from finance experts is what we call compound interest. But I want you to know, you might have heard about compound interest and thought that this was just something that some smart economics, some smart finance people came up with. No, God himself believes in compound interest. God himself is an investor, and he's the one that has come up with this multiplication concept. Imagine, how do you take a seed from one fruit or one fruit or one plant, you plant it in the ground, and you get a whole tree that has multiple fruits, not just one, not just two, but multiple. If this is not compound interest, I don't know what is. God is the ultimate investor, and God never intended to simply add to you. He actually intended to multiply you. And so I want you to start to think about this concept of investing and investment as a God-ordained principle for your benefit, for my benefit, for the benefit of your family, and even for generations to come. Let's look at Abraham and the covenant that God had with him. Genesis 17 verse 2 says, "And I will make my covenant between me and you," this is God speaking, "and I will multiply you exceedingly." Then Abraham fell on his face in verse 3, and God talked with him, saying, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer shall your name be Abraham, but your name shall be So no longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you." Isn't this amazing? Abraham was one man, one barren man that some people may argue. Sarah, his wife, with him, barren. No child for many years. And yet we see God, a God of multiplication, not saying, "Oh, Abraham, I'm going to give you a child." Yes, that was a promise, but he was going beyond adding to him and Sarah with one child. He said, "I'm going to make nations come out of you." How many people does it take to make a nation? 1, 2, 3, 100, 500, 1,000, 2,000? It takes certainly many people to make a nation. And here we see again the concept of multiplication, and not just nations, but kings also. This is buttressed in the book of Isaiah, chapter 51, verse 2. It says, "Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you, for I called him alone, one man, and blessed him and increased him." The Message version says, "Yes, ponder Abraham, your father, and Sarah, who bore you. Think of it, one solitary man when I called him, but once I blessed him, he multiplied." There is a blessing factor that comes with investment. There is an investment factor that causes your additions to be more than just 1 + 1, but actually turns it into multiplication. This is what I'm talking about. We also see this buttressed many times throughout scripture in the life of Abraham, and even when God was talking to his people. Abraham, in Genesis 22, verse 17, he says, "I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars." These promises are not just for Abraham. Galatians 3:29 tells us, "If you belong to Christ, then you have become the true children of Abraham, and what God promised him is now yours." So these promises of multiplication, of nations, of descendants that are more than the seashore, they are not just for Abraham, they're for you and I. And we are applying this principle to our finances as well, just as I read in Genesis 1:28, where God blessed them and God said, "Let them be fruitful and multiply." This multiplication is not just in the fruit of the body, but it is actually in regards to your finances. It is in regards to you prospering and being in health, even as your soul prospers. And I want you to understand, like I said, the idea of multiplication, the idea of compounding, the idea of having more than just 1 + 1 is a God principle. He says in Deuteronomy to his people, he says, if you follow my laws, if you keep my commandments, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 16, he says, if you keep these commandments and these statutes, that you will live and multiply. The promise is not just for us. It's not just about you and yourself, but it's actually about your children. As believers, if we want to move from just enough or passing on just enough to our children, or worst case, even passing on liabilities and debt, then we need to move from adding to multiplication. Abraham's wealth and prosperity did not end with him. Yes, we talked about nations, but even in the life of Isaac, his child, the Bible talks about how Isaac was a man who waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. Trust me, it was not just additions. The Bible talks about him having flocks and possessions of herds and a great store of servants. This kind of blessing comes from multiplication, not just addition. The same can be seen even for Jacob. Jacob, the son of Isaac, in Genesis chapter 30, verse 31, we read that it says, and as a result, Jacob became very wealthy with large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys. If we're thinking about the world that we live in today, the 1%ers, the 10%ers, the 99, the people who are in the top, 1% of rich people, of wealthy people in the world, they do not just add, they do not just save, but they invest. And so we should be looking to be like them. Proverbs 13 talks about a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. A good man, a wise man. And it says, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. If we are going to be parents who are responsible, taking our practical Christianity, our practical principles of wealth, of finances, then it means it has to flow to our children. It needs to flow to the Isaacs and to the Jacobs. We can talk about estate and inheritance planning, your will and all of that, trust, etc. later on in more detail. But I just want you to understand that if you're going to be prosperous to not just yourself, but for your children's children, then investing has to be added as a basic thing that you do for your portfolio, for your life, for your family, for your children. The message is simple, and I believe you've understood it. If you haven't started investing, if you hadn't started thinking about investing, then I want you to begin to do so today, not just for yourself, but for your children's children, for your generations to come. The book of Mark chapter 4, Jesus tells us a story, a parable about how, those that sowed on different grounds, how they were able to yield different harvests, and that different measurements were 30, some 60, some 100-fold. I want you to know that as you put your money, your finances into good, sustainable, well-researched investments, you'll be able to reap 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. And like in that simple example that I gave with the £20 being multiplied, you'll be able to get that extra £34. Imagine taking those numbers and multiplying it by 500 or making it 1,000 per month. Literally the rewards, the measures of return are literally infinite. Let's begin to think like investors. Let's begin to think like the 1%ers. Let's begin to think like people that have their future generations in mind. You are blessed. This has been Business, Faith, and Finance with Benedicta.